big penalty!
Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving into a stack of sources today that lay out a pretty significant shift, potentially, in trade relations. Specifically, we're looking at former President Trump's proposed tariffs on India. Our goal here is, well, to extract the most important bits of information, understand the immediate impact and the broader implications, too, and hopefully help you get well-informed, quickly, about these, let's face it, pretty complex economic and diplomatic currents.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here, I think, is how these proposed changes could ripple through all sorts of sectors and economies. We'll be looking really closely at the specifics in the source material to understand not just what's happening, but, why it actually matters.
Right. So at the heart of it, our sources are talking about this proposal. Former President Trump suggesting a 25% tariff on goods imported from India. But it's not just that 25%. There's also talk of an additional penalty, and that part seems a bit fuzzy.
Yeah, that penalty is where things get, let's say, strategically ambiguous. Our sources point to some earlier talk, maybe a 10% BRICS penalty, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, aimed at countries seen as having an anti-American policy agenda, especially those exploring, say, rival currencies. But whether this specific penalty is that, or if it's something new, maybe related to Russian energy purchases, well, the exact rate isn't clear. And that uncertainty, as one source really points out, that's kind of the point, isn't it? It adds complexity for businesses, keeps them guessing.
Interesting. So this isn't exactly coming out of the blue then. I mean, the sources suggest this follows some previous issues.
Exactly. No, this isn't isolated. The sources are pretty clear that this escalation, it builds on earlier warnings, sticking points in trade talks between the U.S. and India. It feels like a progression, definitely not a sudden turn.
Wow. Okay. And when you look at the actual duty increase, that really puts it in perspective. Our sources say the weighted average duty, it was around, 2.7%?
Yeah, something like that initially.
And it had already climbed up to maybe 11.6, 11.7%.
That's right.
And now potentially jumping to 25% plus whatever this penalty might be. That's huge, almost 10 times the original baseline.
It's a massive leap, yeah, a really significant increase.
What does that kind of jump do immediately to the supply chain, according to the sources?
Well, the immediate effect is a big shift in costs, obviously. But interestingly, our sources indicate U.S. importers have already been, quite proactive. They've apparently been increasing import volumes from places like India ahead of this, kind of anticipating higher tariffs.
So stocking up.
Pretty much. It suggests businesses were already hedging their bets, trying to build up inventory before the costs hit. It's a classic move, really, to cushion the blow. But it also shows prices are definitely going up.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. With such a big potential hit, which sectors are expected to feel this most immediately and substantially?
The sources point to a few key areas. Steel, definitely. Automobiles. And significantly, smartphones and mobile phones made in India.
Oh, right, because a lot of phone manufacturing happens there now.
Exactly. A substantial number of phones exported to the U.S. are actually manufactured in India. So that's a critical area. And you'd expect, as the sources mention, some reaction in the Indian stock markets tied to companies in these sectors.
So given that impact, are any sectors safe? Are there any exemptions mentioned in the sources?
Yes. Interestingly, there are. Pharmaceuticals are explicitly mentioned as being granted an exemption by the U.S.
Okay, pharmaceuticals. That makes some sense.
And semiconductors are also mentioned as exempt, although it's noted that India doesn't really have major semiconductor exports to the U.S. right now anyway.
Right, so it's a real contrast then between those hit hard and the few that are exempt.
A very clear contrast, yes.
Do the sources give any clues as to why? Why exempt pharma, for instance, while hitting phones and cars?
They don't spell out the exact reasoning, not explicitly. But you could infer, certainly for pharmaceuticals, it might be about, protecting access to medicines for U.S. consumers, or maybe maintaining really crucial supply chains that are hard to replace quickly.
Okay.
It suggests the tariffs are being applied quite strategically, hitting where there's leverage, maybe, while preserving things deemed essential or where India isn't a major competitor yet, like semiconductors.
Okay, so back to those sectors that are hit hard. With these big cost increases.
Yeah.
What does that mean for the bottom line? I mean, who actually pays for this? Do the sources suggest it's like a 50-50 split between the U.S. importer and the Indian exporter, or is it more complex?
That's the million-dollar question, right, for the businesses involved.
Right.
The sources basically say it's likely to be decided on a case-by-case basis, company to company, maybe even trade to trade.
So no single rule.
No, not really. It often boils down to, well, who has more negotiating power in that specific relationship, in that specific supply chain? Our sources suggest this kind of flexible approach to sharing the cost burden is pretty typical in these kinds of trade disputes. It pushes both sides to find, specific solutions bilaterally. And for Indian exporters, obviously, it means their products become less competitive price-wise, which could force them to look for other markets, right? Diversify, that classic economic response.
Yeah, it really feels like there's more going on here than just economics, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which raises the question about the diplomacy.
Yeah.
The sources mention Trump's opening statement calling India a great friend, which seems, well, a bit at odds with slapping on major tariffs. How did the sources square that?
It's a definite paradox, and the sources really do highlight that contradiction.
Yeah.
Calling India a great friend while simultaneously imposing tariffs that, as the material suggests, could be seen as an act of not being a friend. Some sources connect this slightly confusing stance to the wider U.S. diplomatic picture, particularly regarding Russia. Given India's, long-standing ties with Russia, Trump's own sometimes unclear position on Russia might be influencing this approach to India.
Like India's caught in the middle somehow.
Potentially. It suggests India might be navigating a really tricky path, balancing its relationship with Russia while also engaging closely with the U.S. So this complex geopolitical situation, it definitely adds another layer on top of the purely economic effects we're seeing. It's like a multi-level chess.
Absolutely. And while we're digging into these specifics, the sources also kind of zoom out, right? They talk about general economic principles. What happens typically when tariffs like these are imposed? What are the potential outcomes that affect, well, all of us?
Yeah, the sources outline the standard economic theory here. So for U.S. consumers, the obvious one, prices for imported goods from India in those affected sectors, they might go up, could add to inflation. And it might shift demand, maybe towards stuff made domestically or imports from other countries not hit by the tariff.
Okay, makes sense.
Then for the Indian exporters, as we touched on, their products just become less competitive in the U.S. market. That could mean lower sales, lower profits, and it really pushes them, as we said, to diversify, find other customers, other markets.
Right, that pressure to adapt.
Exactly. And the broader impact, the sources warn, is that these things can sometimes lead to retaliation. The affected country might impose its own tariffs, and then you risk escalating into a wider trade dispute, which, can disrupt global supply chains and just general economic stability.
So these aren't just abstract principles. They could genuinely shape everything from what's in your shopping cart to, well, international relations.
Precisely. They have very real-world consequences.
Okay, so let's try and summarize what we've unpacked in this deep dive. We've looked at a really significant potential shift in U.S.-India trade, centering on this proposed 25% tariff, plus that ambiguous penalty. We've seen how key industries, steel, cars, and especially mobile phones made in India, seem to be right in the crosshairs, while others, like pharmaceuticals, are notably exempt, which suggests a very targeted strategy.
Right. And the immediate future, well, it'll likely show us the short-term market reactions, how businesses on both sides start adjusting to this potentially much more expensive trade environment, but connecting it to the bigger picture, the long-term health of U.S.-India trade, and maybe even broader global economic stability, that really seems to hang on how these adjustments play out and how the whole diplomatic conversation evolves. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What's the ultimate endgame here in this complex relationship?
Absolutely. A lot to keep watching.